Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, September 6th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the issue of the economy and voters across this country as they look to the 2026 midterm elections with a lot of distrust and dismay around the President of the United States and his handling of one of the top issues facing Americans today, that being the economy and inflation nationwide. Now, the New York Times released an article yesterday bringing up a very good point, leading with a question here. Will President Trump have to run from the economy in the 2026 midterm elections? And it's a very fair question. As more and more data points come out, with the most recent jobs report reporting one of the lowest adds in jobs for this past month of August that the nation has seen in a tremendously long time, it does beg the question on an issue that Donald Trump really did very, very well against Vice President Harrison in the 2024 election. Will this be the issue that does him and his political party in 2026? Now, we've been tracking for quite some time that Donald Trump's approval rating on the economy really hasn't been super hot. Real Clear Politics shows him at a negative 12-point national average on the issue, and in terms of inflation, it gets even worse. Approval on Donald Trump handling the issue of inflation, the most recent survey from Economist and YouGov shows negative 22. What we see on the Real Clear Politics average is negative 20. And what really spurred this, video into action was seeing the most recent CBS News survey that we've seen on the national stage, asking voters not even necessarily about how they view Donald Trump and his handling of the economic issues that face Americans. It simply is a question far more simple. The United States economy is getting better, getting worse, or staying about the same. Just 27% rather, of Americans say that the economy is getting better. 56% adamantly say the economy is getting worse. And if you felt that the economy was in a bad position, about 17% of those voters are saying that it's staying about the same. And the numbers continue again, have trended in a downward direction. Just 36% of voters saying the U.S. economy is good is not a great sign. 67% of respondents expect prices to go up in the next few months. And you're looking at terms of financial situation. Roughly those who say that they're in a good position ends up skewing towards the higher tax brackets, which of course makes sense. But when it comes down to those who are making less than $50,000 a year, roughly around the median for an average income earner in the United States, 60% say that their own financial situation is bad, and just 54% of those within the salary range of $50,000 to $100,000. Looking at these economic numbers, Donald Trump is not in a great position. There's a reason why voters look to this and sour on the way that he is handling, whether it is tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, the way he's handling foreign and domestic trade policy, every point that we've seen in terms of how Donald Trump has been trying to quote-unquote tackle the economic crisis that is facing the average American. Voters don't like it. And the more and more that they see that the prices are going up despite Donald Trump and his press secretary in the White House and the Oval Office adamantly saying prices are going down, Americans don't feel it. And that was the big deal with Biden and the Democrats in 2024. Because arguably, the way at which the American public views the economy often does not actually translate to how the economy is actually performing. There have been plenty of times in recent memory, including the 2024 election, where maybe the economy, felt like it was in a much worse off position. But in terms of how it was actually performing, it wasn't all too bad. And although now we're starting to see the economy really take a downturn, if you look at the monthly change in jobs numbers, especially leading up to the 2024 election, you are talking about tremendously higher job numbers, that the moment that Donald Trump took office, it sees an immediate downturn in a direction that really does damage to the Republican Party. And so looking at the way voters will look at the 26 midterms, I can't help but ask, the issue that brought Donald Trump over the finish line in 2024, will it be the issue that brings Republicans down in 2026? And looking at, even elections where the economy has been in a good position, Donald Trump and the Republicans haven't always done well in those circumstances either. In 2018, Democrats won the majority of the toss-up districts that we found in these key races, and the majority of the key races in entirety in the 2018 elections, despite the national environment for the economy being arguably in a very good position. In 2018, Democrats won the national popular vote by 8.4% and defeated the Republicans in a pretty tremendous fashion. 235 for the Democrats to 199 for the Republicans. Thinking about that midterm, now in 2026, confounded with factors that, there are a lot of voters that are very angry about the current economic state of the nation. I almost sounded like Jaden Smith for a second there, but seriously, voters look at this stuff and they care deeply, as they did and have in every single election in the 21st century, because it very seriously matters to them. And thinking about the last presidential, it is not lost on any of us as to why Donald Trump won the election on economic issues. It's not lost to us that Donald Trump won the culture war on a lot of social issues that, in a way, were directly tied to the economy. There was a lot of discussion around, why it was that the opportunity economy and the way at which Kamala Harris had advertised her policies and plans for the country wasn't landing. And a lot of it did have to do with the fact that, yes, Donald Trump ran a much more simpler campaign that clearly resonated more with voters than Kamala Harris's. But at the end of the day, there was an association to a president that voters felt, even if it wasn't necessarily the case. Voters felt like the economy was in a very bad position under Biden. And they took it out on his vice president by voting for Donald Trump. And in the same way, the economy was in a very bad place in 2020 amidst tremendous amounts of social unrest. Joe Biden won the election against Donald Trump, ending 3 back-to-back presidential terms of 2-term presidents. Donald Trump broke that cycle. A lot of it in 2020, as much as we remember the pandemic and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and a real racial reckoning in America being one of the most mainstream and hot-button issues that we talked about in 2020, absolutely. But underneath it all was a collapsing market, collapsing job force. Donald Trump was seen as responsible, including and intertwined with his response in terms of social unrest, in terms of pandemic response. All of these things were tied into economic issues fundamentally. And what we saw and what we will see is that the economy has driven a lot of reasons as to why voters in 2016, for instance, went for Donald Trump. Why white working class voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that had backed Democrats for 28 years decided that it was Donald Trump and not Mitt Romney, and Donald Trump and not John McCain, and not George W. Bush, and not Bob Dole, and not George H.W. Bush, but it was Donald Trump who won these 3 states. The economy was their issue. In 2020, they came back, and in 2024, they swung back yet again, this time to the GOP. And taking a look at these economic numbers, Donald Trump, again, came into this presidency with actually a lot of optimism in terms of how he would handle the economy. Voters largely in the first 3 weeks put him on average up by about 8 to 10 points across the country. Then it started to take a bit of a negative downturn, but the average was keeping him above water and keeping his approval rating on the net actually quite high compared to where he was 8 years ago. But then it became negative. And since that, we have not seen a singular positive poll for Donald Trump on the economy. And inflation, he was never really doing that well. The first data point that came out when he started in office was +6. Then it dropped to -3, then to -7, and now today the average is -20 points. On this issue, inflation, on the issue of the economy, voters do not love Donald Trump. There are some issues that keep him in a position where some voters are, looking at this and saying, okay, on immigration, about -2 nationwide. Okay, that's good for Donald Trump, certainly. On crime, a net positive. But on the issues, again, that matter the most to voters, and that was clear as day in the last cycle and will be very clear in 26, Donald Trump doesn't do well. And without these numbers, the GOP does not have a pathway in 2026 to make that case to the American public. Because even in times where they had been able to make that case on the issue of the economy, Democrats still won. And what I imagine we will see happen is that as voters continue to feel, and as they project themselves, 67% of them say they expect prices to go up. Just 15% of consumers are confident that prices will go down. That is insanity. 15%, when 50% of this nation voted for Trump in the last election. So thinking about what this means in the future, well, again, as voters start to see that they're making less and less money, that they are spending more and more money at the supermarket, at wherever it might be, on gas, on average and everyday household items, by the time they reach the midterms, you are going to find, and we've already reached that point, but you are going to find a lot of souring on Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And that's why they're trying to redraw these maps. Because it isn't as simple as them taking a beating like they did in 2018. The 2016 elections gave Republicans 241 seats in the House of Representatives. That 2 years later, they dropped down to 199. I know it says 200 here, but that's after a special election was prompted in the 9th District, where there was a lot of conversation around legitimacy around that election. But looking at the broad strokes here, Republicans lost 41 seats from 2016 to 2018. And in terms of shifts on the map, blue, blue, and blue. Almost every district, in fact, 75% plus of House districts in the nation swung over 15 points to the left. That shows the severity of what 2018 was for the Republicans. Imagine that in 2026 with economic issues being on the side of Democrats for the first time in a while since 2020, because in 2021, inflation was bad. In 2022, I did that. Biden stickers popped up at gas stations across the country because gas prices weren't doing so well. In 2023, voters started to sour more on the economy. In 2024, it became the number one issue that Kamala Harris was losing on. Winning on healthcare, winning on abortion access, winning on student debt forgiveness, like all these different metrics. But when it came down to the fundamentals and the most important economic issues, she was seeing them in the negative. And that's what drove her to defeat in 2024. Same thing that could drive Republicans into the ground in 2026. And so we'll keep our eyes peeled as we see more and more of the data around inflation, more and more of the data around the economy, just the way at which the American public perceives Donald Trump as he unrolls more tariffs, as the job numbers get worse, as he does, again, different things across this country that make voters associate Donald Trump with the very real and lived experience of not being able to afford things that you were able to 4 years ago or 8 years ago, even under Trump the first time. Because that's also the biggest negative. That we've seen a day and age where Donald Trump was president where the economy was good. And not always, people and economics professors and economists just generally. The people who you see commentate with a Wall Street background on CNBC, they are the ones who, even in their analysis, said it's a combination of the economic policies of Trump and Obama, that under 2017 to 2020, you were paying less for your Chipotle bowl than you are today. But since then, it is Donald Trump and the Republican Party that very often are taking actions that don't work. And we know they don't work because they were predicted that they wouldn't work, and they aren't working. And now voters are seeing that. Headline after headline after headline. China responds, your iPhone's going to cost more. Right? Canada responds, your average breakfast items are going to cost more. Right? Less and less production on the things that you like the most, and yet you are still paying more for them. Duh. Right? That's the way that works. But it's interesting to see, and not done in a way that, this is something that you couldn't have predicted. I think at the end of the day, voters often look at things, and you can understand it to be very true and very real, that a lived experience can drive you to vote in any direction. And when it comes down to 24, it convinced America to vote Donald Trump into office again. And now we are really starting to see it hit and the bottom fall out from under itself, because I have not seen numbers these bad in a very long time. They remind me of some of the worst points of time of the Biden presidency, and arguably, too, some of the worst points in time during the pandemic that eventually led to the loss of the incumbent president and the loss of the incumbent party, and that's what we are seeing now. And so I'd take a look. I'd keep watching to see if these numbers get better, if they get worse. My take is I expect these numbers to get worse before they get better, and if something does not turn around in terms of public perception, economic numbers, whether it's the jobs report, whether it's reduction in tariffs, whether it is market growth. All of these different things must turn around by 2026. Otherwise, the same issue that got Republicans elected into office in the first place will be the reason they lose in 2026. Unless redistricting can save them, these economic numbers are so dire that they put Republicans in such a bad position, and arguably, I don't see a clear pathway forward. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join on the screen. There's a video for you to watch, then a playlist on my second Trump administration analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.